Welcome, energy strategists. Today we witness an earthquake shaking the very foundations of North American trade with a single stroke of the pen. Donald Trump slapped a 10% tariff on every barrel, kilowatt, and molecule of gas coming from Canada, invoking national security. And suddenly, crude stopped flowing meekly southward, valves slammed shut, prices sizzled, and tankers swung their bows toward the old continent. To gauge the blow, remember that nearly two-thirds of Canadian crude ends up in Midwestern U.S. refineries, where razor-thin margins rely on a constant, cheap supply. With the surcharge, the meters spun out of control, the West Texas-Western Canada differential narrowed, refineries watched profits evaporate, and Alberta producers felt the hit straight in their coffers. Ottawa responded with an express diversification plan, reroute cargoes to the Atlantic and woo European buyers. The result was immediate. In March 2025, Canadian-flagged tankers unloaded nearly 8 million barrels in ports such as Rotterdam, Bilbao, and Hamburg, more than double the 2024 average. And even diesel, so coveted by Europe's heavy industry, changed course. After shipping 350,000 tons the previous year, brokerages now predict a major jump. Sector giants Suncor, Cenovus, and Imperial Oil told investors that the European market is here to stay, while export charts lit up bright green. Why Europe? 3 words: demand, treaties, and security. The EU burns about 10.5 million barrels a day, and after slashing purchases from Russia, every friendly drop is worth gold. The CETA treaty left 98% of tariff lines at zero, so a Canadian barrel lands in Rotterdam toll-free, and the Repower EU plan urges Brussels to diversify toward friendly suppliers. But oil does not travel alone. Everything begins in the Rockies, where the Trans Mountain Pipeline, recently expanded to 890,000 barrels per day, pumps crude toward the Pacific coast. High tolls and regulatory battles keep utilization around 77%, yet it feeds terminals in Quebec and Newfoundland, where heavy bitumen is blended and softened for European refineries. There, the Aframax vessels await, medium-draft workhorses that now carry 76% of Canada-Europe flows, and whose Mediterranean charter rates top $51,000 a day. Each St. John-Bilbao voyage lasts roughly 12 days, and even with that mileage, the post-tariff differential yields juicy margins. Inside Canada, reactions are mixed. Alberta applauds diversification and British Columbia smiles as Trans Mountain tolls help amortize the 36 billion Canadian dollars invested, but across the prairie farms fear Washington's retaliation on grains and fertilizers. Foreign Minister Melanie Joly warns that oil could become a bargaining chip if the escalation continues, while Enbridge estimates that southbound flows will only fall significantly if the tariffs last years, not months. Europe, however, is a competitive arena. Norway offers sweet crude with a low footprint, Saudi Arabia can slash prices in hours, and the United States is weighing domestic discounts to shield its refineries. Volatility also lurks. If Washington lifts the tariffs tomorrow, part of the Canadian crude would head south again and the Atlantic route would be left with idle capacity. And, as if that were not enough, Europe's green transition is accelerating. Starting in 2030, Brussels will impose strict methane limits on fossil imports, meaning Canada will have to prove leakage reductions and perhaps deploy carbon capture to keep its slot. Here, the specter of CO2 appears. Oil sands crude averages about 75 kilograms of CO2 equivalent per barrel, the highest footprint in the Canadian sector. Ottawa plans an emissions cap and carbon credits to spur capture and storage, while Brussels readies the CBAM, the Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism, so the environmental cost could equal or exceed Trump's 10%. The year 2025 will also see the launch of LNG Canada in Kitimat, with 14 million tons per year of liquefied gas ready to sail to Asia and, in time, to Europe. Some analysts foresee that the gas currently crossing into the United States will find better prices across the oceans, but Ottawa has been adamant. There will be no subsidies for new projects unless they are net zero by 2030. On the grand geopolitical board, every Canadian barrel that reaches Europe reduces dependence on unpredictable suppliers and strengthens the Atlantic alliance. For Canada, diversification is insurance against a capricious neighbor and a springboard to premium markets on two oceans. For the United States, the lesson is uncomfortable. Trade barriers can boomerang and hand influence to competitors. On this global energy chessboard, a presidential signature can divert entire fleets to another continent. Are we facing a passing fad or the beginning of a permanent shift? Leave us your opinion in the comments, subscribe and ring the bell. Here we decipher geopolitics, drop by drop. On February 1, 2025, from the epicenter of executive power in Washington, a storm was unleashed that began to reconfigure the entire region's energy map. President Trump signed a tariff decree that imposed a 10% charge on all energy products coming from Canada and a much higher tariff, 25%, on the rest of its exports. This measure, publicly justified in terms of national security and as a tool to correct long-standing trade imbalances, was not only intended to protect the U.S. economy, but also aimed to stimulate local employment. However, within hours this announcement raised alarms on both sides of the border, as the measure directly affected a vital sector: energy. It is important to recall that nearly two-thirds of Canadian crude fuels refineries in the U.S. Midwest. These processing centers, with extremely tight profit margins, depend on a constant, low-cost supply. With the implementation of these surcharges, the cost structure was radically disrupted, causing the price differential between West Texas Intermediate and Alberta crude to shrink drastically, thereby undermining the profitability so crucial to Canadian producers. The response was swift. Almost instantly, the Ottawa government, led by Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, activated its retaliation plan. On March 4, Trudeau announced the implementation of mirror tariffs of 25% on a wide range of U.S. products, from consumer goods like motorcycles to processed foods such as ketchup, amounting to an impact of 30 billion Canadian dollars in exports. This measure was not merely symbolic, it sent a resounding political and economic message. Canada had decided that it would not stand idly by while what it considered a unilateral redefinition of the rules of commercial engagement was imposed. With this decisive response, Ottawa demonstrated its determination to balance the scales and force Washington to negotiate on more equitable terms. Parallel to these tariff measures and countermeasures, the Canadian cabinet launched a series of emergency strategies aimed at diversifying its export markets. Aware that its traditional dependence on the U.S. market could become a vulnerability, Canada accelerated the search for new destinations for its crude oil. The results were swift. Just 1 month after Trump's initial announcement, tankers flying the maple leaf flag headed for the Atlantic and began unloading nearly 8 million barrels at strategic European ports such as Rotterdam, Bilbao, and Hamburg. This volume, more than double the monthly average recorded in 2024, revealed not only the country's logistical adaptability, but also the growing appetite of the European continent for secure and stable energy sources in times of geopolitical uncertainty. The impact of these decisions was immediately felt in global markets. Although oil, natural gas, and refined products were formally exempt from the new U.S. levies, the uncertainty generated by the escalating trade conflict proved destabilizing. In the days following the announcement, both Brent and West Texas Intermediate crude fell by around 4%, a reflection of the nervousness among investors and market operators, anticipating a prolonged standoff. This phenomenon, which some call an uncertainty discount, arises when market participants lower their expectations and adjust their forecasts in anticipation of potential future conflicts and stalled negotiations. Within the boardrooms of key centers like Houston and Calgary, concern grew even further. U.S. oil companies began warning of a possible domino effect in the supply chain, emphasizing that tariffs on steel and aluminum, materials essential for manufacturing pipelines, offshore platforms, and refining equipment, would increase operating costs at a time when global competition had already squeezed profit margins. Reuters analysts forecast that the price of hot-rolled coil could rise to as much as $890 per ton, an increase of 15% that could delay major investment projects and even reduce the profitability of the entire energy industry. Beyond national borders, the repercussions of this series of measures extend on a global scale. The Trump administration firmly maintained that these tariffs were indispensable for combating the trade imbalances that had plagued the United States for decades. However, international organizations such as the International Monetary Fund began to point out that the escalating tariffs represented a significant risk to the global economy. On Wall Street, the reaction was immediate and forceful. Massive sell-offs led to the loss of trillions of dollars in market capitalization, and the specter of a recession began to appear in the forecasts of major central banks, generating anxiety about the direction of the global economy. In summary, what began as a unilateral measure to protect national interests has transformed into an earthquake that shakes not only prices and maritime routes, but also long-standing trade alliances. By redirecting its shipments toward Europe, Canada has not only secured new horizons for its energy exports, but has also underscored its capacity to adapt in a highly volatile environment. On the other hand, the United States now faces the internal costs of its own trade barriers, demonstrating that while protectionist policies may have clear objectives, they can trigger chain reactions that affect the entire economy. The tensions arising from these tariffs have opened the door to a potential reconfiguration of commercial relationships, where trust and stability in supply will be increasingly valued. Every tariff, every countermeasure, has the potential to rewrite the rules of the game on this complex geopolitical board. As international players recalibrate their strategies and prepare for what could become a long battle of commerce, the future of energy flows and global trade hangs in the balance, marked by uncertainty, innovation, and resilience. We will continue to analyze every move in this unfolding game, where energy and geopolitics are inextricably intertwined, revealing drop by drop the intricate framework of a new economic order.